Hello chemistry students. In this video I'm going to go over the Module 1 Lesson 1 notes where we're going to talk about what chemistry is and some about the scientific method. So first off, what is chemistry? So we're going to study the composition of matter and the changes that matter undergoes. And chemistry is really all around you and in you. There's all these processes that have to happen inside of your body to provide energy and stuff, as well as all around in the world. You can see examples of chemistry at work. So we're going to go over a few examples of those in the next few slides. So fireworks, the burning, the explosion provides energy to move electrons up to higher energy levels, and then when they relax back down, they give off colors of light, and depending on the substance, the color may vary. So you see all these different colors, the blues and the reds and the greens, and those are a result of electronic transitions happening in the electrons of atoms. Alright, so it's like, why is the iceberg frozen in the ocean? Isn't? Well, the salt in the ocean water lowers the freezing point of the ocean. So you have these icebergs, which are mostly fresh water, that will be frozen while the ocean water is not. It's also why we put salt on the roads in the wintertime, to lower the freezing point so that the ice will melt off of the road. Alright, and medicines impact chemical processes within the body, and different medicines impact different processes. And there's still probably lots and lots of medicines that we haven't discovered yet either. Alright, so different branches or areas of chemistry. There's organic chemistry, which is the study of carbon compounds, many of which can be found by or produced by living things, but that's not that the living thing doesn't necessarily have to define organic chemistry. Alright, inorganic chemistry is the study of compounds that are mostly not containing carbon, and explosive synthesizing explosives would fall into that inorganic chemistry category. There's biochemistry, it's the study of processes that are taking place in living organisms. Analytical chemistry, you're going to be focused on the composition of matter or finding exact amounts of things. And then physical chemistry is going to be studying the mechanism, the rate, and or the energy changes that matter or in matter when it's undergoing changes. Alright, pure chemistry is the pursuit of knowledge for no particular purpose. So you might study metalloids and their properties just to find out what their properties are. And then an applied chemist might take that pure chemical research and then use it to apply it to finding the best composition of metalloids to make the semiconductors in computer chips, like that Pentium i5 or whatever is in your computer, or excuse me, Intel i5. But anyways, okay, so experiments, we're going to look at some of the parts. Oh, I went too far. Okay, there we go. The scientific method. So we're going to go over this briefly. So you're going to start by stating a problem and then collect data about that problem. Sometimes you don't even get to the observation stage. Sometimes you just read up on the problem, and you may find that somebody else has already done an experiment to answer the question that you have. Or you might find that you need to modify your question to answer something that hasn't been answered yet. And then as you collect data, you can collect qualitative data, which is a description. Things like, the solution is blue, the base feels slippery, there's bubbles formed by the reaction, versus quantitative data, which is going to be numerical measurement kind of data. So, 3.2 grams or 20 centimeters long or any other variety of numerical quantities you could collect about a particular substance. Then you would formulate a hypothesis, would be an explanation, and it would be testable with an experiment. You would perform an experiment to test the hypothesis, and you'd have to plan it carefully so that you would only test one variable at the time. And then in your experiment, you would have an independent variable, which is the variable that you are changing or manipulating, and then the dependent variable, which you would measure to see if it responds to the independent variable. Sometimes the dependent variable is known as the responding variable. And then you'd have a control that doesn't receive any kind of manipulation, just to give you a standard for comparison to make sure that there's not something else crazy going on in your experiment, and also to prove that whatever manipulations you're making do change the outcome. Alright, so here's a flowchart that shows the scientific method. So if we get to the point of testing the hypothesis, and if the data agrees with the hypothesis, maybe you test again to further confirm your results. And if there's not an agreement, then you go back and modify the hypothesis. All right, let's compare observations and theories. So observations, you observe, you witness something, you record what happens. Then a theory tries to explain why that thing happens. And a law is going to summarize a consistently observed behavior. So a law, like the law of gravity, tells what happens. We can predict with great certainty and repeatedly observe that when you drop an object, that gravity causes a certain amount of acceleration on that object. A theory is to then try to explain why that thing is happening. And in other scientific branches, so you might compare and contrast that law of gravity with theory of evolution. We can consistently observe the impacts of gravity versus the theory of evolution. We're not able to consistently observe that process happening from, say, a single-celled organism all the way to a complex organism. That's not a process that we're able to observe repeatedly over and over again. So that's why evolution is classified as a theory and not a law, versus the law of gravity or the reaction types in chemistry. Those are essentially laws because you can observe those things repeatedly over and over again. Alright, so here's an example of an experiment. So you notice that fertilizer is applied to plants seem to make the plants grow taller and faster. So you delve further into it. First you formulate the hypothesis. If fertilizer is applied to plants, the plants grow taller. Next you develop an experiment in which you take 20 identical plants and divide them into two groups. The one group you add no fertilizer, and the other group you add fertilizer to each plant. And you might be able to think about there would probably be some experimentation that's possible there as far as adding certain amounts of fertilizer to see which amount is the best. Then every other day of the experiment, you measure the height of each plant, record data. After 4 weeks, you're ready to analyze your data. So what's the independent variable, what's the dependent variable, and what is the control in this experiment? Take a moment to think about it, maybe pause the video, and then come back. Alright, so did you get it right? The independent variable is the application or lack thereof of fertilizer. The dependent variable is the height of the plants. That's what should respond to the addition of fertilizer. And the control would be the group of plants to which you did not apply any fertilizer. So, and one thing that's great about this particular experiment is there are a lot of plants involved. If you only did this with 2 plants and maybe one of your plants got a disease and died, you wouldn't really have a lot to compare to. But when you have a larger sample group, then you are more likely to get better experimental data. All right, so it's important to keep the other variables the same. Those things are known as constants. And a lot of people confuse constants with the control. And these things, you want to give the plants the same amount of water, the same amount of sunlight, and the same temperature, and just generally try to make sure that there are no significant differences between the two groups other than the independent variable. Thanks for watching.